Inside, the mansion was a labyrinth of dust-covered furniture, tattered curtains that fluttered like specters in the drafty halls, and portraits with eyes that seemed to follow one's every move. They explored room after room, finding nothing but relics of a bygone era, until they reached the library. It was an expansive room, with shelves that stretched to the ceiling, filled with books that were as old as the house itself. James, ever the leader, ventured further into the library, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. He stopped abruptly, his light falling on a book that lay open on a reading stand in the center of the room. It was an old tome, its pages yellowed with age, but what caught his attention was not the book itself, but what was written on the open page, his name, James Patterson, written in a flowing script that hadn't dried. "How?" James murmured, reaching out a hand hesitantly towards the book. Before he could touch it, a cold breeze swept through the room, the pages fluttering wildly before settling back down on another page. This one had another name, Sarah Jennings. Sarah stepped forward, her curiosity overcoming her fear. "This can't be real," she said, her voice a whisper. The room felt colder now, the shadows deeper. One by one, their names appeared in the book as each of them took a turn to see. When it came to Kyle, he laughed, breaking the tension. "Nice trick, guys. You set this up." But the laughter died quickly when the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway outside the library. They froze, the sound growing closer, the steady tap-tap-tap of someone or something approaching. Emily clutched Derek's arm. "We need to hide," she hissed, pulling him towards a large armoire in the corner of the room. James, Sarah, and Kyle followed, the group squeezing into the cramped space just as the library door creaked open. From inside the armoire, they watched through the slats as a figure entered the room. It was a man, old, his back hunched, dressed in a butler's uniform that looked like it came from another century. He walked with a limp, his step slow but deliberate, as he made his way to the book on the stand. He paused, running a gnarled finger down the page, then turned his head sharply towards the armoire, as if he knew exactly where they were hiding. The students held their breath, not daring to move. The old butler smiled, a chilling, knowing grin that didn't reach his eyes, which were dark and hollow. "Seekers of secrets, finders of doom," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. Then, turning away, he limped back to the door, closing it behind him with a soft, ominous click. "It's like they're right next to us," Derek replied, his usual skepticism washed away by the undeniable reality of their situation. The flashlight in his hand trembled slightly, casting quivering shadows against the strange symbols on the walls. The symbols, aglow with an otherworldly light, seemed to pulse rhythmically, as if breathing. James, driven by a mix of fear and fascination, stepped closer to the center of the room, toward the pentagram. "I think it's coming from here," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. The closer he got, the clearer the voices became. They were not just whispering, they were chanting, a litany that seemed both a warning and an invocation. Kyle, ever the brave one, joined James in the middle of the pentagram. "This is insane," he muttered, looking around as if he might find an explanation written on the dusty floor. "What are they saying?" Sarah, who had lingered near the stairs, reluctantly moved closer, her interest in the arcane overcoming her dread. She strained to listen, her knowledge of ancient languages picked up from her studies flickering through her mind as she tried to translate the eerie chorus. It's a protective chant, but it's been corrupted somehow," she finally said. "Like it's been twisted into a curse." The revelation made them pause, the gravity of their discovery settling around them like a cloak. They were standing in a nexus of old energies, tampered and tainted by intentions long since turned to darker purposes. Panic surged as they rushed around the room, searching for another exit, but there was none to be found. They were trapped, the room closing in around them, the walls themselves seeming to pulse with a malevolent energy. The temperature continued to drop, frost beginning to form on the stone floor beneath their feet. The air grew thinner, harder to breathe. As they huddled together for warmth, the chanting resumed, louder now, more demanding. It filled the room, echoing off the walls, a relentless assault on their senses. "We need to break the chant," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "It's binding us here." But how to break a chant that had ensnared them, woven into the very fabric of the room? They didn't know, but they understood that their survival depended on it. The realization that they had to act, to find a way to sever the ties that held them, lent them a desperate energy. As they prepared to confront the unknown, to challenge the ancient curse that held them prisoner, they knew their ordeal was far from over. The house had revealed its secrets, but it was not done with them yet. The night was long, and the darkness deep, and in its shadows, they would have to find the strength to fight, to reclaim their freedom, or be lost forever in the forgotten chants of the past. As the chant grew louder, vibrating through the very stones of the chamber, each word seemed to echo with an ancient power, stirring the air into a visible swirl of frost. The group huddled closer, their breaths visible in sharp, panicked gusts. Sarah, her eyes wide with fear yet sparked with determination, turned to James. "We have to disrupt the pattern of these symbols." "It's the only way," she shouted over the din, her voice barely carrying over the relentless chanting. James nodded, struggling to think through the cold that seeped into his bones. "But how? We don't even know what we're dealing with." Sarah's eyes scanned the moving symbols on the walls, her training in ancient languages now a lifeline. "These patterns are like a circuit, feeding energy back into the chant. If we can break the circuit somehow, we might stop the process." Derek, who had been quiet, his skepticism long eroded by the night's eerie events, chimed in, "Look for anything out of place, something that doesn't fit the pattern." Frantically, they began examining the walls, their hands hovering over the cold stones, careful not to touch the symbols directly. The light from Kyle's lighter flickered, casting their shadows in grotesque shapes that danced along with the symbols. Emily, who had been relatively quiet, suddenly gasped. "Here? This symbol looks newer, like it's been added." She pointed to a small glyph that pulsed with a red glow, distinct from the other bluish symbols. Without hesitation, Sarah examined the glyph. "That's not just newer, it's different. It's a binding mark, used to strengthen a spell. Maybe if we can erase it. Cover it, disrupt it, anything." James interjected, looking around for something to use. He grabbed a dusty tarp from the floor and threw it over the symbol. For a moment, nothing happened, and the air grew oppressively silent, as if the chamber itself was holding its breath. Then, abruptly, the chanting stuttered, like a record skipping, before resuming with a furious intensity. The glyph began to burn through the tarp, its red light glowing ominously. "It's not enough," Kyle yelled, desperation creeping into his voice. He looked around, his eyes landing on a can of paint they had seen earlier among the boxes. Without a word, he sprinted, grabbed the can, and hurled it at the wall. The can burst upon impact, splashing white paint over the glyph and several surrounding symbols. The effect was immediate and electrifying. The air snapped, crackling with energy as the chanting came to an abrupt halt. The symbols stopped moving, their glow fading until they were just dull etchings on the cold stone walls. The room fell silent, the oppressive energy dissipating like mist under the sun. For a brief moment, they allowed themselves to hope, to believe that they had broken the spell. They huddled together, catching their breaths, their bodies shaking not just from the cold but also from the sudden cessation of fear. But the respite was short-lived. As they watched, the white paint began to sizzle, the glyph burning through with a persistence that chilled their newfound hope. The red light flared violently, and the chanting resumed, now with a vengeful fervor. This isn't just about stopping the chant, Sarah realized aloud, her voice tinged with a mixture of awe and horror. It's about what the chant was holding back. As if in response to her words, a low growl echoed through the chamber, a sound so primal and terrifying it froze them in their tracks. From the shadows at the far end of the room, two glowing red eyes opened, fixating on them with predatory interest. The creature that emerged from the darkness was like nothing they had ever imagined. It was large, hulking, its form shifting and undulating as if not entirely solid. Shadows clung to it like a cloak, and where it stepped, the ground frosted over, a chill spreading outward like death's touch. "We need to go, now," James shouted, the urgency clear in his voice. But as they turned to flee, they found the staircase they had come down was no longer there. In its place was just a solid wall, the exit sealed. Trapped with the creature of nightmares, they backed away slowly, their minds racing for solutions. But as the creature advanced, its intentions clear, they realized that their night of horror was far from over. In the depths of the mansion, with no way out and a malevolent force awakened, their battle for survival was just beginning. As the creature's growls filled the chamber, echoing off the ancient stones, the true horror of their situation set in. They were not just fighting to escape the house, but to escape a fate far worse than they had ever imagined. The creature advanced, its movements fluid yet erratic, as if it was both part of this world and beyond it. The icy air intensified with each step it took, frost creeping over the stone floor and climbing up the walls. The group retreated, but with each backward step, their hope of escape dwindled. Sarah, thinking quickly, began to chant in a language none of the others understood. It was an attempt, desperate and bold, to use the same ancient words that had been carved into the walls, words that now seemed to pulse dimly under the paint. "What are you doing?" Derek hissed, fear edging his voice as he watched the creature pause, its head tilting as if intrigued or perhaps confused by Sarah's words. Trying something, she managed between chants, her voice steady despite the tremble in her legs. "These are binding words, maybe they can hold it back." The creature's eyes, glowing pits of red, narrowed, and it let out a growl that vibrated through the chamber. Yet, it hesitated, the words seemingly having an effect. Encouraged, Sarah chanted louder, her voice echoing through the ancient space. James, Kyle, and Emily, though unsure of what to do, began to look around for anything that might aid them. In a corner, Kyle found an old iron rod. He grabbed it, not as a weapon against the creature, they all instinctively knew that physical attacks would be useless, but as a tool to perhaps pry open a new exit. Together, they searched the walls, feeling for any irregularities or hidden mechanisms. As Sarah continued her chanting, keeping the creature at bay, the others worked feverishly. Suddenly, Emily, pressing against a seemingly innocuous part of the wall, stumbled as it gave way under her touch. A hidden door swung open silently, revealing a narrow passage dimly lit by phosphorescent moss. "Here." "This way," she called out, adrenaline surging through her as she beckoned to the others. They needed no further encouragement. Even the creature recoiled slightly as they made their move, rushing towards the passage. Sarah was the last to enter, her chant ceasing as she crossed the threshold. The creature lunged, faster than before, as if realizing its prey was about to escape. Just as Sarah was about to be caught, Derek, who had already entered the passage, reached out and pulled her in, slamming the hidden door shut behind them. The creature's roar of frustration was muffled by the thick stone, but it thudded against the door, causing small showers of dust and debris to fall from the passage roof. Panting and shaken, they moved quickly down the passage, the light from the moss casting an eerie glow on their pale faces. The passage sloped downward, leading them deeper into the earth beneath the mansion, away from the creature, but towards an unknown fate. They emerged into a large underground cavern, the air cool and damp. An underground lake mirrored the eerie luminescence from the moss above, casting the cavern in a ghostly light. The beauty of it was stark, almost otherworldly, but they had little time to appreciate it. They needed to find another way out, one that led back to the surface and away from the horrors of the mansion. As they explored the cavern, the reality of their situation set in. They were not just fleeing from a monster, they were delving deeper into the mysteries of an ancient place that had been sealed for reasons now painfully clear. The creature, the chants, the symbols, all were part of a larger history, one steeped in darkness and danger. "We can't give up," James said, his voice echoing slightly off the stone walls. "There has to be another way out, a real exit." As they ventured further into the cavern, the path forked, leading them to make choices they hoped would lead to safety. The echoes of their steps filled the air, a reminder that every decision now was a matter of survival. The story of their night at the mansion was far from over. With each step deeper into the earth, they uncovered more secrets, each more perilous than the last. What lay ahead was unknown, and as they moved forward, the darkness seemed to watch, to wait, to whisper promises of deeper horrors yet to come. As they ventured deeper into the cavern, their only light came from the eerie glow of the moss overhead. The air grew colder, the path beneath their feet slick with moisture. The underground lake to their left stretched into darkness, its water still and silent, a mirror reflecting their tense, worried faces as they passed by. Suddenly, Emily, leading the group with a hesitant torch, stopped short. Ahead, the cavern opened into a wider chamber, and in the center, a stone pedestal stood solemnly, bathed in a shaft of light that seemed to come from nowhere. On the pedestal lay another book, similar to the one in the mansion but older, its cover thick with dust. "This can't be a coincidence," Derek muttered, his voice echoing strangely in the chamber. Cautiously, they approached the pedestal. Sarah, with a deep sense of foreboding, reached out to brush the dust from the cover. The title was etched in gold, glowing faintly as if reacting to her touch, "Guardians of the Threshold." Guardians? Kyle looked around nervously. "Are we talking about more creatures like the one in the house?" Sarah opened the book to the first page. The words were written in the same ancient script as the others they had seen, but here there were illustrations too, dark, twisted figures that stood guard around a gate, their eyes empty sockets that seemed to stare out from the page. "This book, it might explain everything," Sarah said, her voice low. "About the house, the creature, why this all started." They gathered around, reading over her shoulder as she translated the text. The book told of an ancient pact, an agreement forged between the living and the creatures of shadow, meant to protect the world from the darker depths of reality. The house, the cavern, the passages, they were all part of a complex designed to keep the gate sealed and the creatures contained. But someone had broken the pact, and now the boundaries were weakening. "The creature we saw, it must be one of the guardians," Emily concluded, her face pale. "And if it's free, the others might be too." James clenched his fists, looking back the way they had come. "So, what do we do? Just leave? Warn people?" "No," Sarah said, her eyes still on the book. "We need to restore the pact. It's the only way to ensure these creatures don't make it to the surface." "But how?" Kyle asked, frustration coloring his voice. The answer lay on the next page. A ritual, complex and dangerous, requiring courage and sacrifice. It was their only chance to seal the gate once more, to bind the guardians back to their duty. The process would be perilous, and there was no guarantee of success, but the alternative was far worse. With determined, albeit heavy hearts, they prepared to perform the ritual. They arranged themselves around the pedestal, each taking a role as dictated by the ancient text. Sarah led them, her voice steady as she recited the words that would bind the guardians anew. As she spoke the final verse, the light in the chamber grew brighter, blinding them. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and a sound like thunder rolled through the cavern. Then silence. When their vision cleared, they found themselves standing outside the mansion, the sun rising over the horizon, casting long shadows across the ground. The air felt lighter, the oppressive sense of dread lifted. "We did it," James said, disbelief and relief mingling in his voice. They looked at each other, their faces weary but resolute. They had faced the darkness and prevailed, though the cost was yet to be fully understood. As they walked away from the mansion, the sun climbed higher, its light promising a new day. But behind them, the mansion stood silent, a sentinel over secrets buried deep. The door remained closed, the guardians bound once more to their duty. But for how long? Only time would tell. Their story, a harrowing journey through shadow and fear, would live on, a tale of courage and a warning. For some doors, once opened, and not so easily closed again.